Last year, my dad and I made about $750 selling these marble toys that we started making, but we weren't able to keep selling for very long because we work out of a co-working space where we have to essentially share all the tools, and the tool that we rely on the most, the CNC router, was often down or being used, and it was just so unsustainable. We were getting a lot of late orders that we ended up just having to cancel this. That's why now we're going to try to see if we can make something similar just using hand tools. Or maybe not hand tools, but not a CNC router. I'd say at the very minimum for this project, you're going to need a plunge router like the one we have here. And just so you guys know that everything doesn't have to be super expensive and there's always ways around it, this is literally one we just borrowed from my uncle, so I'm not too sure where it's from. But if you're a woodworker and have other friends, I'm sure you can ask around and find somebody who will borrow it to you. Some kind of saw or just something to cut out a template from a board of wood. We used, I think this is called a drum sander, but you could do this by hand too, just with some sandpaper. It's just going to take a little bit longer. And then last, obviously, you need the wood, some screws, and just basic things like a tape measure and just something to hold down your piece, like some clamps. This is going to be a super rough draft of one. You could make a much nicer one with a laser engraver or a CNC to make out the template at first. But here we are improvising, just using a can of, I think this is spray paint or lacquer, just to get that curve shape. And this is just to show you guys that you really can just use whatever you have lying around. We just really wanted to get it done, and I feel like my motto for 2025 is done is better than perfect. So here we're just adjusting it until we had the right curve that we wanted for each of the marble channels to go. We didn't want it to be too big because otherwise you have to remember we're using a 0.75 inch bit. So it's gonna cut off if it's too far to the corner. So we tried to make the circles a little bit smaller, as you can see me doing here. And at the end of the day, this really doesn't have to end up perfect. As long as it doesn't go over, the marbles will still, roll, and that's the point of it. I've seen ones that are clearly handmade and have less of a perfect machine look, and I think it's really charming, and a lot of people actually like that. Now that we've made the rough shape, now I'm just going in with a marker, and as you guys can see, not very perfectly, but just going over the final shape that we want. As I said earlier, we decided to make the kind of wave pattern a lot less big so that we don't risk running over the edge and ruining the whole template. And now for the tricky part here on the bandsaw, my dad was just cutting out that shape. We need half of it so that the router can follow along. If you guys, it's starting to make sense to you what we're going to be doing, the plunge router is going to be following that profile so that you can make that half wave shape, and if you do it right, it should come out on that 3-inch board that we're planning. Like I was saying earlier, if I were to make this shape on a CNC or a really strong laser engraver, I think it would come out a lot more perfect, and maybe in a future video we can try that. But for now, we just wanted to see if we could make some kind of, marble channel toy that's functional without a $10,000 CNC router. And I personally would 100% prefer to do it on a CNC router. I'm not a very good woodworker, so watching my dad do this was making me super nervous. I felt like the band was going to snap or just something was going to go wrong. So for future videos, we probably will use a CNC router, but I'm sure my dad knows more about what he's doing, so here we go. And then this is where we realized my dad had kind of screwed up. As you guys can see, it doesn't match the where the marble would come out with the other side. So we ended up having to cut it shorter than we originally wanted and just kind of make do with what we had. Next, we were bringing this over to this, I think this is called a drum sander, but we're just getting rid of any smooth or unsmooth parts of it and just making it as nice as possible for the router to follow along later. Like I said, if you really want, you could probably do this with some sandpaper by hand, and it'll just take you a little bit longer, but you don't necessarily need this fancy machine that we're lucky to have in our space. And then here we realized that we messed up again. We made those waves still a little too big. As you guys can see, if we were to pass a 3/4 inch router, we'd be right along that edge. So we decided to just cut them down a little bit so we can be safer and make sure we don't waste this piece of wood. So if one of you guys decides to do this project, make sure you actually measure and don't just eyeball it to save yourself some time. Alright, now that we're pretty sure that this should fit, we're just lining it up to see where it's gonna fit, and we're remembering that the bit is gonna go a little bit further in, so it's not gonna be completely in half, but we're just marking where we're planning to put that template and how it will fit overall. And then now that we got the right placement on the board we're planning to use, we're just going to secure it with some screws. And looking back, I'm realizing my dad's not holding that in the safest method, so don't do it like that. But here we are, just nailing it to the board so we can get ready to pass the router around. And then we're just placing another board behind the piece of wood that we nailed to our, I don't know what you'd call it, the main board that we're going to use for our toys. But yeah, we're just securing it as much as we can, even using some clamps, because we really don't want it to move, otherwise that's going to screw up the whole toy. And now we're preparing to finally pass the router. We're using a 3/4 inch bit that has an extra long, I think it's called shaft, so that it can reach. Originally we tried to use the bit that I use for my CNC router and it was just too short. Oh, and I forgot that we're also using double-sided tape to secure it. But if you wanted to build a jig and use clamps, I'm sure you could find a way fancier method of securing it that would be a lot faster and use a lot less materials for the future. But we're not planning to do this multiple times. This was just kind of a test. We wanted to see if there's a method we could use so that if our CNC is ever down or unavailable, we can have a backup. And here my dad's just checking the depth. We wanted this to fit about a little bit less than 1/2 inch deep because the board is about 3/4 inch deep. I've noticed if it's too shallow, sometimes the marbles will fall out, but if it's too deep, it's just unnecessary work and you run the risk of going too deep through the board. And then here my dad is finally, after all this prep work, passing the CNC router through the board, and it looks like everything's going pretty well. It was really scary to be standing next to this machine, so I can only imagine running it by hand. I don't think this is something I'd do again or in a batch process, but it was just interesting to see. After the first pass, it was looking actually pretty good. Most of it was pretty smooth, so we decided to do a couple more passes just to finish it off. And this was the finished result. It wasn't completely perfect, but I mean, for something we kind of threw together in one moment, I thought it actually came out pretty nice. In total, I think we probably spent 1.5, close to 2 hours on this project. Granted, we did have a lot of the stuff set up for us, but here's the moment of truth to see if it works. Okay, and the marble got stuck. Here we're trying it on the other end, and it did work, so I think with a little extra sanding to level it out, it would be functional. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed, and if you are to try this out, let me know how it works for you.